wrote that all around nice guy line myself, and I didn't really realize they were actually going to read it. So you might be wondering why we came up with this crazy Terminator versus Mary Poppins title for the talk today. When Praveen asked me to give this presentation, I was kind of bouncing ideas off with Krista Mattern over there from Validity and Efficacy, messaging her a few titles. One of my titles had something like Fighting the Terminator in it or something like that. And she asked me, why does your presentation say Fighting the Terminator? And I gave her the logic, told her the logic of that. And she came right back with Mary Poppins versus Terminator. And I said, that's it, I went with it. So I went with it, wrote it up, sent it up to Praveen. And the only problem was I actually had to figure out what I was going to say about Mary Poppins after that. So here goes nothing. You are all going to be now part of a big experiment in trying to figure out how to incorporate Mary Poppins and Terminator in a presentation. How many of you are aware of the story of the Terminator? Okay, good. And Mary Poppins? Okay, good. So I'm going to skip these two slides, the summary. And this is the audience participation part of the presentation. I just want you guys to give me just a couple characteristics of the Terminator. What's the Terminator like? Handsome. He's good looking. He's got a lot of grit. He's got a lot of grit. Unyielding. Unyielding. He's very strong physically. He travels through time. Travels through time. Cold and mechanistic. He's very intelligent because he's connected to a computer. He's aggressive and violent. What about Mary Poppins? Perfect in every single way. Yeah, she is. Mary Poppins is perfect in every single way. Anything more specific than that? Likes to sing. She likes to sing. So she's creative, optimistic. She weighs the same as a duck. Weighs the same as a duck. She's got a lot of grit. He said that with a straight face. She's got a lot of grit. She's honest. So we have kind of two central questions guiding the presentation today. The first one is about the characteristics of Mary Poppins versus the Terminator. And in the future workforce, what are we looking for? Are we looking for somebody who's more like Mary Poppins, or are we looking for somebody that's more like the Terminator? And so that's going to be the first part of the presentation, is trying to answer that question. The second part is, once we think we have an answer to that question, we're going to ask ourselves, well, what is ACT doing about it? So to answer the first question, I'm going to present a very simple model of the way we think work is changing, why it's changing, and the skills that are going to be required for this changing workforce. It's very simple. It's going to come as a surprise to none of you, I think. And it has four basic parts. First is that, as you know, technological innovation is steadily increasing throughout the world and in our lives. We're using technology more and more. Second, obviously, this technology is being incorporated into our everyday work life. That's changing the way we work. Third, because it's changing the way we work, it's also changing the job market, who we hire and who we don't. And the changing job market then is changing a requirement in the types of skills that we need in the workforce. And once we get to this skill shift section, that's where we're going to be able to compare Mary Poppins and the Terminator to see what kind of characteristics would fit better within the workforce between those two individuals. So I'm very briefly going to go over this model with you. So first, as you know, there's a lot of technological innovation happening. I'm just providing just a couple of examples here. The number of smartphones and tablets and PCs is increasing seemingly exponentially, and we're using them more and more. The number of internet-connected devices is increasing quite a bit. So in 2015, there's 15 billion internet-connected devices in the world. It's projected by 2025, there's going to be 75 billion internet-connected devices in the world. So clearly a lot's going on technologically with the way it's being infused into our life. Clearly, it's also going to be infused into our work. I have a couple of examples of this as well. So here's just an analysis from 2013 from the OECD. These are countries that use the internet in their businesses. And here we have, for example, for large companies, 95% of large companies basically throughout the world, or for OECD participating countries, use the internet in their jobs. So almost all large businesses use the internet. What else do we see? Well, we see things like industrial robots, increasing the use of industrial robots, and you can see a steady increase. These are a little bit of an old analysis, but this is projected until 2020, a steady increase in the use of industrial robots in the workforce. So what's this telling us? That we're using a lot more computers, a lot more computerization in the workforce, using a lot more robots in the workforce. And what can these kinds of things do? What kind of tasks can we do with this type of technology? Well, one thing that these things are really good at is doing routine tasks that can be easily automated. Right? Routine tasks that can be easily automated, and that could include cognitive tasks like doing simple calculations, or it can include manual tasks like working on an assembly line. So what you should see then is through this increase in the use of technology at work, we should see that workers should be doing less of this automated routine tasks, fewer of this stuff at work, but more because they're being freed up to do fewer of these automated tasks. They should be also freed up to do things that are non-routine, things that require more uniquely human skills. And from analyses in economics, this is from a study in economics, that's exactly what you find. So this is a projection of, or this is an analysis of worker tasks, the tasks that workers tend to do in the US workforce. This was from 1960 to 2009, and you see that prediction coming true. Here you have routine cognitive and routine manual tasks. For example, like doing things like a bookkeeping or accounting would be a routine cognitive task, routine manual tasks like working on an assembly line. Those types of tasks are going down. People are doing less and less of those as in the workforce as we advance in the years. But what are we doing more and more of? We're doing more and more non-routine tasks, and that includes both analytical tasks, non-routine analytical tasks. That would be something like complex problem solving, for example, or doing something that's creative, something that as of right now, we don't think computers can do or not do very well. And also non-routine interpersonal tasks, those would be like working in teams. So because we have computers and robots and other technologies that can do these types of tasks, the workforce ought to respond. And so we shouldn't need to be hiring for these types of jobs anymore. So we should be getting rid of those types of jobs and creating new jobs because we're freeing up workers that can do more of these types of tasks, these non-routine tasks. And when we look at some trends in job market shifts, we do find that. So this example is another paper from the field of economics that shows that 47% of US jobs are at risk due to automation in the coming years. That's a pretty large chunk of jobs there. And the ones that are most at risk to be cut are those that are low paying and automated jobs. And kind of conversely, there was recently, I think just last year, this paper came out by Dell and the Institute for the Future that said that projected 85% of jobs by 2030 are ones that haven't even been invented yet. So that's, many of our children will be working on jobs we've never even heard of. So it's a little bit difficult, obviously, to make projections about jobs of the future, but we can look at current trends to figure out what kind of skills are going to be necessary in those jobs. And so what are the current trends? Sticking with our theme of economics, here's another recent paper from the field of economics that shows how employment is changing by the requirements of the job. And what you find is probably not surprising considering what we've already been talking about. These two are jobs, blue and red lines are jobs that require high social skills. And you can see employment is rising in jobs that require high social skills, whereas jobs that require low social skills or don't require high social skills are decreasing. There's less and less employment in there. Kind of interestingly, this green line are those that require high math skills. Even jobs that require high math skills but don't require social skills seem to be decreasing.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you define, in this context, what is social skills?
And this would be anything, for these types of jobs, these would be any kind of jobs where you're working with another person, like as opposed to like, this might be a job where you're like sitting in a office crunching numbers all day, for example. So specifically just interacting with people. It's just a really broad definition. So what's the lesson here? You could probably tell from the title of the talk and from my job is that, and why I'm probably bringing this up, is jobs that require social and emotional skills. People are hiring for those types of jobs, and those types of skills seem to be increasing in importance. Related to this is just another analysis from the same paper, looking at the jobs that require high social skills, social and emotional skills. They're being paid more, so their wages are going up at a more steadily increasing rate as compared to jobs that don't require social skills. I don't know what this dip's all about, but in general, the trend is still there. So businesses are acutely aware, corporations are acutely aware that these skills are important for their workers and that they're going to continue to be important. And there's many, many surveys that have been conducted within the last years that have demonstrated that. So here's just one example from last year. A survey from 260 employers from NACE looked at which characteristics of incoming employees do you think are most important? And this is just the top 10 out of that list. And you can see almost all of them are either social emotional skills or are at least somewhat related to social and emotional skills. So you see, I put a little question mark, for example, by communication skills. That at least has an aspect of social and emotional skills in it because you have to be able to take others' perspective to communicate well with other people. Another example, Google recently conducted a study where they looked at characteristics of their top performing employees. And although you might expect that science and math skills might be number one, they ended up actually number 8 on the list. The rest of them were either social and emotional skills or skills that could be seem to be at least related to social and emotional factors. So at ACT, the social emotional learning component is represented in the holistic framework by the behavioral skills component. And behavioral skills is composed of these 6 factors: acting honestly, getting along with others, keeping an open mind, maintaining composure, socializing with others, and sustaining effort. In work done by Alex Casillas and others are sitting at the top up here, conducted some survey research with 370 workforce employers and found right here that every single one of these behavioral skills was rated as important by the majority of employers that were surveyed. It's a little bit low for socializing with others, but still is in the 62% or something like that. So the way we work is changing. That seems pretty clear. It also seems clear, I hope by now, that the new way of working emphasizes the social and emotional skills. So that brings us to our first question. Does the world need more Mary Poppinses or more Terminators? So,
I was just going to ask you a question about your Google slide.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that part of the reason why STEM skills are number 8 is because, like, yeah, of course they're going to have STEM skills when we hire them.
Yeah, it's a given.
The differentiation about having all these skills 1 through 7 that is causing us to want them. Because, like, if you don't have that number of STEM skills, you're not going to get hired.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like a minimum requirement to even be hired. I was actually just having a conversation with somebody yesterday about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
so like
it's
the fact that it's number 8 doesn't necessarily mean quite what you might
it's partly a methodological kind of a factor
Okay,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, that's true. So to compare Mary Poppins and Terminator, we're going to use these behavioral skills and compare them on each of the 6 behavioral skills, starting with acting honestly and ending up with sustaining effort. So you guys know, I'm sure you guys know what's going to be the outcome, considering all of the characteristics that we already brought up at the beginning. Acting honestly, Mary Poppins, she provides honest feedback to the Banks family. That's the family that she's the nanny for. Terminator constantly lies to get his way. That's 1 point for Mary Poppins. Getting along with others, she gets kids to take their medicine with a spoonful of sugar. Terminator, hopefully this works.
Good night. Good night.
I'm a friend of Sarah Connor. I was told that she's here. Could I see her, please?
No, can't see her. She's making a statement.
Where is she?
Look, it may take a while. Want to wait? There's a bench over there.
I'll be back.
So that was not an example of getting along with others. That's 1 point for Mary Poppins. Keeping an open mind, Mary Poppins is very curious and creative, imaginative. Terminator only has one thing on his mind. That's killing Sarah Connor. Another point for Mary Poppins. Maintaining composure. She's very calm and composed. Terminator, I have one more video for you. It's a little long, but I hope you enjoy it.
First day,
Yes,
I'll take care of her.
thank you.
You know, kindergarten is like the ocean. You don't want to turn your back on it.
Oh, they're okay. Don't worry. Everything is under control. No. Monsters. What are you doing with this?
Aren't you gonna break it up? No, 2 more days of this, and you'll quit.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! No. Don't start this. Oh no.
Okay, so I cheated a little bit. That was Kindergarten Cop. But it was still an example of Arnold Schwarzenegger not maintaining his composure, so I'm gonna count that as a point for Mary Poppins. Socializing with others. Mary Poppins, as you know, has tons of friends. Terminator, on the other hand, doesn't even know how to give a high five. So he's horrible at socializing with others. Finally, Mary Poppins has already won, but we're gonna go with the last one, sustaining effort. Mary Poppins flies away in an umbrella at the end of the movie. Terminator doesn't quit until he gets crushed in a hydraulic press. So I'm gonna give Terminator 1 point. So the winner, Mary Poppins, 5-1. So in answering our first question, in a battle for the future workforce, who has the advantage, Mary Poppins or Terminator? We're gonna go with Mary Poppins on that one when we compare them on the 6 behavioral skills of the holistic framework. So what are some of the implications of this? Well, one implication is if we wanna achieve part of our mission of helping people achieve workplace success, we need to think about social and emotional skills, and we need to pay some attention to those. And right now at ACT, one thing that we're doing to pay attention to social and emotional skills is the development of ACT Tessera. So that's what we're going into right now. So a lot of this may be, you may hopefully be familiar with Tesara by now. Tesara is an assessment for middle school. We have a middle school assessment and a high school assessment that measures 6 constructs. Schools and students get reports on student standings on these social and emotional skills. And we also have, importantly, a teacher playbook that has intervention and curriculum materials for hopefully teaching these social emotional skills in school. So what does it measure? Here's the 6 constructs. The top 5 constructs on this list are more what we would consider social and emotional skills. We're redesigning Tesara a little bit for the fall, and we've added a school climate measure from that we took out of ACT Engage into the current version of Tesara. So Tesara measures grit, teamwork, resilience, curiosity, and leadership. And these map onto the big 5 personality constructs of conscientiousness, which is basically being hardworking and organized, agreeableness, which is basically working well with others, being nice and having empathy. Emotional stability is being good at managing stress and being free from worry and anxiety. Openness to experience is kind of being curious and creative. Extroversion has many facets, such as being sociable, but also being assertive and being energetic. So why use the big 5? What are some of the advantages of using the big 5? Well, one is that there are tons and tons of terms that are being thrown out there as social emotional skills, and it becomes confusing. But because of the way the big 5 was developed, you can use the big 5 as kind of an interpretive tool for categorizing all of these skills. Another advantage is that it constantly predicts important outcomes. There have been several meta-analyses that have shown the ability of the big 5 factors to predict outcomes across school, work, and life, for example, health and happiness. It seems to be nearly universal. In this map, all the countries in green is where the big 5 has been replicated. Yellow countries you can't tell very well in here. There's some suggestive evidence, in white we need more data. So it seems to be a universal structure of people's characteristics. And probably most importantly is that it aligns to the ACT holistic framework. Here's where the big 5 aligns with the behavioral skills framework. Big 5 doesn't have an acting honestly component, and it acting honestly usually falls within agreeableness in the big 5. Now, this is important because it aligns with everything we do in regards to the fact that everything we do at ACT should align with the holistic framework. And also one big advantage of the behavioral skills component of the holistic framework is that it breaks down the 6 domains into components, subcomponents, and then finally it breaks them down into behavioral skills. And Alex and others have done really good work in creating performance level descriptors based on these behavioral skills. And you can use these behavioral skills then to provide feedback to students and educators on the types of things that they should be doing and the types of things they should be striving to do if they want to improve their social emotional skills. So that's what we measure. We measure those 5 constructs plus now a school climate measure. Well, how do we measure these skills? Well, oftentimes when we ask people, how do you know if your SEL program is working? Or how do you know if your students' what your students' social emotional strengths and weaknesses are? Sometimes we get the answer, well, I know it when I see it. Or sometimes we'll get the answer, you can't measure these things. Well, a problem with you know it when you see it answer is that our judgments are notoriously influenced by cognitive biases. And in fact, if you look on Wikipedia and you look up cognitive biases on Wikipedia, you could find a list of over 180 cognitive biases. And these biases mean that our judgments, when we're trying to judge somebody else's social emotional skills just kind of holistically based on our own human judgment, are going to tend to probably be influenced by irrelevant information. So just to provide a couple examples of cognitive biases, for some cognitive biases, we incorporate information into our judgments that we shouldn't be incorporating. So for example, in one study, Stanford students participated in an auction for a bottle of wine. And before bidding on the wine though, they were asked to write down the last 4 digits of your social security number. And then they said, make this a price. So if your social security number is 1234, that would have been $12.34. And then they were asked, is that bottle of wine that you're about to bid for, is that worth more or less than that price you just wrote down? What you find then is that people incorporate that irrelevant information, which is their social security number, into their judgment of people's price, of the wine's price. So if you had a low social security number, your estimate was that the wine was worth $19.95. If you have a high social security number, your estimate was that the bottle of wine cost $27.26, or 76 cents. So we tend to incorporate sometimes irrelevant information into our judgments that don't really have anything to do with it. That's one kind of broad category of biases. Sometimes we forget about information or we ignore information that we should be using. So for example, in the fundamental attribution error, we tend to underestimate the effect of situations on other people's behavior. So in one classic demonstration of this, one person was asking another person, a subject saw one person ask another person quiz questions. And then afterwards, the people watching the video were asked, which one of these two people is more intelligent? What they said was that the person asking the questions was more intelligent. And that's even though the fact that they were told ahead of time before the study began that this person was already given the answer to the question. So if we can't rely on people's judgments because they're so biased, that kind of leads us to the conclusion that some kind of standardized assessment would be useful. So when we come to measure social emotional skills, this is what typically happens. People get provided with these statements like this and are asked to indicate how much they agree or disagree to each of them. So these types of self-report items tend to be highly efficient. You can do lots of them in a short amount of time, and they do have evidence for validity and reliability. However, items like these are also subject to biases of their own. So for example, as you can tell, they're very easy to fake. If you're asked a question or if you're asked to respond to the statement, I'm prepared for class on a college application, you could strongly agree to that statement even if you were the worst student in the world. Another bias is reference bias. And what this has to do is that there's always an implicit comparison when you answer these questions, an implicit compared to who question. So if I'm responding to the statement, I'm good at calculus, and I'm comparing myself to my two young sons who have yet to take a calculus class in their lives, I'm probably more likely to agree to that statement than if I'm comparing myself to Einstein. And in that case, I'm more likely to disagree to that statement. So how do we deal with this? One solution that we have at ACT is that we recognize the fact that there is no one method that's perfect. There's no perfect method for measuring social emotional skills. And so what we do is instead of relying on just one method, we use multiple methods and try to triangulate on a score with the idea that any bias that's associated with one particular method, the influence of that bias should be washed out or at least minimized with the inclusion of multiple methods. So in Tesara, we do have self-report items. So we do use self-report items, but we also use situational judgment test items, and we use forced choice items, both of which I'll show you in a minute. And we combine those into one score called the ACT SEL score, also known as the ASS. Just kidding. We don't really call it the ASS. We're for right now calling it the unified score. I just thought that was funny. Here's a situational judgment test example. Students are provided, for situational judgment test items, we have 2 per construct in the new version of Tesara. And students are provided with scenarios that are kind of like, that should be like scenarios that they should experience in school in real life. And then they're provided with 5 possible responses to that scenario and are asked to indicate how likely they are to respond in each way. Now these, research has shown that these types of items are more difficult to fake than self-report items. And also because you're reporting on your behavior, you should basically say either I do this or I don't do this behavior. It shouldn't be as contingent on what other people do. Your answer shouldn't be as contingent on what other people do. And so reference bias should be less of a problem for situational judgment test items. Our third item type, our forced choice item types. These are the forced choice examples that we give to our elementary students. People are presented with either a set of 3 adjectives or a set of 3 statements and are asked to indicate which of these 3 statements is most like them and which is least like them, and they leave the third one alone. Now, it's always the case that 2 of these statements are very positive, and because you can't say both of the positive statements are most like you, then this should be much more difficult to fake. And previous research does show that these types of items are more difficult to fake. And also, importantly, the comparison for these items is within the student, not between students, so you're comparing yourself with yourself. And so in this case, reference bias should not be an issue at all. So we have these 3 item types, and we get information from each of these 3 item types, and through psychometric magic called multidimensional IRT, we combine these 3 item types into one score, and out pops our ass, or our unified score. So that, you might think that sounds interesting or cool, or maybe you don't believe me or whatever, but you might want to know, well, is it working? Well, so far we have some evidence to show that it seems to be working. It seems like we're doing a pretty decent job of predicting grades with all of our, with all 5 of our constructs. You don't need to worry too much about the numbers, but these are all significant prediction. Importantly, each of the methods provides incremental validity in the prediction of grades over the other. So meaning that none of these methods is completely redundant. Each of them is giving us some kind of information. And also what we're finding, and this is a common finding for most, if not all, social emotional skills assessments, we're finding less kind of more equity in these items. So what this is just this little sub-analysis that we did of white versus non-white differences in our Tessera scores. And then we also had a subset of our data that had standardized achievement test scores. And the presence of any bar here means that the white students perform better than the non-white students. But if you compare the differences for the social emotional skills as compared to standardized achievement test differences, you see the differences is much, much smaller. So we have some pretty decent evidence thus far that our unified score is working pretty well. Now, after students take Tessera, that's not the end. Obviously, they receive reports. First, we're expanding the reporting a little bit for our next form of Tessera. So we're going to have 2 forms of reporting. We have a short, just 1-page report back to back, and then we'll have a longer report for students themselves. Schools also get a roster report where they can look at a list of all of their students' star scores, and then we're including their percentile scores on each of the scales, and also their climate scores. And they'll be sortable and everything. So educators can search through students and rank them on certain constructs, et cetera. And then we also are creating a school comparison aggregate report, also called the SCAR for now, where schools are able to compare themselves to other Tessera schools. Here's just a mock-up, not the final mock-up, but basically this is what the student report is going to look like. If you had the short form, you would just see this front and back. The front page has their star ratings. The back page has just some general information about what is it that we measured, and here what is like a real general basic suggestion for improving. And then some links here to Open Ed. There's Open Ed material now on each of the 5 Tessera constructs. So some links that are added here to link people to videos about these constructs. And then if you have the longer report, you get, now I referred earlier to the behavioral skills and the performance level descriptors. These are taken from those. And so you get to see kind of, we're just calling them example behaviors at your level for what kind of real generally, what people who score at your level look like, their types of behaviors, and then what people at different levels also look like, so that you can see what somebody who scored 4 stars might look like as far as their behavior goes as compared to your 2-star performance, for example. Finally, importantly, we have something we've created called the Teacher Playbook. So this includes lesson plans and curriculum for improving each of the 5 skills. We started out with only 3 skills. For the new version of Tessera, we'll have all 5 skills in there. And it's also being digitized right now. So instead of handing out a PDF to everybody, schools are going to be able to go onto a website and look at a digital tool to use. And this also is going to include Open Ed resources. So there's going to be a big expansion of the Tessera Playbook for the new version. So what's coming up? So right now we have Tessera Middle School and High School. We've just completed collecting data for our Tessera Elementary pilot. This has been conducted all within research within our SEAL team, the Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning team. This is basically what the items look like for elementary school as of right now. Again, remember, we've only conducted one pilot so far, so these are subject to editing and to a lot of change depending on how the results look. One major difference you'll see is that we're relying a lot more on pictures rather than long statements of words. Here's the example of the forced choice that I showed you before. Here's an example of a self-report item from elementary. And then here's an example of the situational judgment test items where I don't know if you notice, if you remember what that first one looked like, there's like 1/5 of the words on here as compared to the middle school and high school words. So we have 1,300 students across 12 elementary schools who have taken this so far. They're taking between 26 and 36 minutes to finish. We would like to obviously cut that down and get it closer to 20 minutes if possible. Thus far, like I said, the data collection just finished, and Dana Marano, who is working on our team, is analyzing the data right now. So I don't have all the results yet. I have some preliminary results for self-report here. What you can see is that most of the scales are at least approaching acceptable reliabilities and internal consistency reliabilities, except for resilience is pretty low, so we need to work on our resilience scale. And we do have some self-reported outcome measures that we included in this study. So we find that even with the unreliable resilience scale, we're still finding a lot of predictive power with most of our scales. Most of these effects are not huge, but they're still pretty interesting, at least to me, for looking at self-reported elementary school outcomes. So we find prediction of life satisfaction, of school climate, school attitudes, basically how much you like your school, school performance, since we couldn't collect GPA data from them, and since a lot of them probably don't even have GPAs, we kind of got this global self-reported school performance indicator. And attendance, on the surface of it, doesn't look very interesting, but we do have a significant correlation with grit for attendance, which I do think is interesting because 3rd through 5th graders really can't control if they do or don't go to school. And so the fact that we're finding anything there at all, to me, is kind of interesting and worth looking into a little bit more. Some other initial analyses that have been done focused on looking at the self-report and the forced choice and SJT information all at once. And once again, as with middle school and high school, we are showing incremental validity, showing that all of these item types are adding information to our prediction of important outcomes, even in elementary school. So we've got elementary school. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. Short answer is fine. How, to what extent, especially in elementary school, is the awareness of differences in executive function coming into play? Since some kids, if they're lagging behind in that, really don't have the cognitive abilities to be able, you know, and that might affect scores too. I just wondered how or if we're taking that into account, and then equally gender, since some studies have been shown self-esteem and confidence affect girls as early as 5, and so they might actually under self-report, they might actually have quite a bit of grit, and yet to them think no. And so I just wondered if there are, a short answer is fine, but
yeah, the short answer for the first one is we haven't taken executive functioning into account yet. Like I said, this is only the first study that we've done. So we're basically right now just focusing on getting reliable scales is kind of the main thing, but that's something that we definitely need to think about more. And then the gender differences we will be able to look at and investigate a little more. We just haven't had time yet. So that's a really good point. I mean, you do find definitely gender differences, especially in the older students from the middle school to high school transition, where you mentioned the girls, they definitely tend to sink for a while in like the self-confidence and the emotional stability part of it. And so you could see that happening earlier in elementary school as well too. It's a possibility. We will look at that eventually. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. Okay, so I don't think I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned, in elementary school, we're starting at 3rd grade. Nobody younger than 3rd grade. What else do we have going on? In Kate Walton from our group will be leading a pilot study on Tesara College. That should be starting later in the summer. We have lots of interested people, lots of interested colleges there. And then finally, we have a WorkKeys SEL product that should be coming out in mid to late fall. And that's basically about ready. So by the time we're done, we should have, if everything works out as planned or as we hope, we should have SEL assessments that go all the way from 3rd grade all the way through the workforce, all which follow basically the same methodology and measure basically the same constructs. A couple other things we're thinking about looking at. One thing we're kind of considering is whether we want to think about providing a shorter assessment option to, especially to middle school and high school, and to potentially even part of the WorkKeys solution. So we may want to, if there's anybody who wants to do something that's kind of quick and dirty, but still reliable and valid, but maybe sacrifice a little bit of the reliability and validity that you would get from a longer survey, we're thinking about maybe trying that out. And something else that we continually hear about is that teacher professional development when it comes to teaching social emotional skills is paramount. And that's something that we haven't done anything with yet, but we have had on the roadmap for quite a while now, the idea to develop a teacher social emotional learning credential. So I've gone pretty long. This is my summary. In summary then, the world of work is changing. The world of work favors Mary Poppins over the Terminator, which that means favoring social emotional skills over things like being very strong, being very intelligent and handsome. And as a consequence, at ACT, we're focusing a lot on social emotional skills, specifically right now with Tesara and related projects. So, thank you.